The idea of like a 2 to 3 year off season. Like I had someone tell me, don't even bother getting on stage next year. Give yourselves 2 to 3 years to grow before you even think about getting on stage for WPD again. And I kind of mentally gave the middle finger. But even just beyond that, I mean, do you think there's some value in dieting down kind of every year just to kind of resensitize to actually adding tissue and insulin and everything else?
Absolutely. And I've never seen someone take a long period of time off and
Mm-hmm.
come back dramatically improved. And you can even look, there's evidence out there. What happens? So even to even more frequent dieting, and it's the rebound that does it. But what happens? You look at bodybuilder to bodybuilder. What happens as an amateur? They work their way up, and then they get to where they're ready to turn pro, and they do like one show a year, right? And they don't really progress much. They might be, like I don't want to pick any names that took a long, like Bob Ciccarillo, but he's kind of a bad one. But he did the same thing actually. Bob Ciccarillo competed for like 20 years. I think it was like 17 years trying to turn pro at roughly the same weight, 220 ish, heavyweight, and then I think barely in the super heavies. But then you turn pro, and what happens? Now you do multiple shows a year, and so you get at least two rebounds a year, maybe even three if you're trying to, if you do some early shows, don't quite qualify for the Olympia, do an early late season show, qualify for the Olympia, have 6 weeks before you need to start your Olympia prep. You might get three rebounds in a year, and then guys blow up when they turn pro. I say guys, just like that's the sexism of being a guy. That's what's always in my head. But countless bodybuilders, like they compete and they grow, and then they're like at the almost ready to turn pro level, and they're the same size for year after year after year. They turn pro, and then boom, they shoot up. And it's because what happens after you do a show? What helps you grow? One, being able to eat in a surplus without getting too fat, and this is more male specific with this body fat thing I'm about to say, but because as a male, 8 to 12% body fat roughly is where you're most anabolic. You get above that point, you start aromatizing more of your testosterone and estrogen, and your insulin sensitivity plummets. And so after a show, you have the longest period of time where you can eat in an excessive calorie surplus without your body fat going above that 12% range, where your hormones are no longer optimal and your insulin's maximally sensitized. So your rate of growth after a hard diet it's like logarithmic. You grow like crazy, and then it basically
Yeah.
asymptotic to zero. So if you don't do another show, do another diet. You don't have to do a show. If you don't resensitize things, you just kind of stay there. And you can look around the gym. When was the last time you saw a permabulker gain 20 pounds in a year? You see Dave gain 20 pounds of muscle every year. You see competitors gain 20 pounds of muscle. You don't see a permabulker. You see they're the same size year after year, and they don't want to diet down because they don't want to lose their size. They don't want to do a show until they're big enough, and they never get there because they've lost all the things that maximize growth: low body fat, the ability to eat a calorie surplus without
Yeah.
going too high in body fat, optimal aromatization
Well, that's
levels, and
exactly
optimum
what I
insulin sensitivity.
told this
So,
guy, but he didn't really want to hear it.
Well, yeah,
I mean, like maybe it might take 2 years worth of time. It might take 24 months to get the size you need. But if you did
Right.
24 straight months without
Exactly.
any resensitization
so
and
when
stuff,
you
yeah,
have, I maybe Rivas is in the situation. I guess sometimes people will take that long just because I don't know their life gets in the way and they just can't compete or for whatever reason. But if you have someone who's a really serious competitor and they decide for whatever reason that they don't want to do a show for 2 years after their last one, do you still have them do a very hard diet in the middle there?
if they get too fat, yeah. And John's actually dieting right now a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
He just did a guest posing, but yeah, it's. I mean, I guess technically you may not have to do that, but if you're doing things right, you probably are because to grow rapidly, you really need to be in a calorie surplus. And that's kind of a misconception. You don't have to be in a surplus to build muscle. That's not. It's not like your body it takes into account everything. It says, well, to add new tissue does take excess calories, but you can be, if your hormones are correct, if your blood androgens are high, if your insulin sensitivity is high, if your estrogen's in a good area, you can you can locally be in a calorie surplus for a short period of time, an hour or two after workout, because we're not adding a ton of weight, when you're adding muscle. You're only adding a few grams a day. So you can be in a local surplus where there's a few extra grams of amino acids that are able to synthesize new muscle tissue, even though you're in a deficit for the day over a 24-hour period. So that's growing into a show. You can build muscle even in a calorie deficit if everything's optimal,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not as efficient. So to maximize growth, you really need to be in a surplus. And if you're in a surplus long enough, some of that extra, you're not going to nail it perfectly, like the exact number of calories to build muscle. There's going to be some excess that's going to get turned to fat. And so you don't necessarily have to get too fat and diet, but if you did that, you probably weren't growing as fast as you could because you weren't, you were holding back calories.
I'm curious about how the math of this works out when you consider people with really different metabolisms and just different propensities for staying lean or getting fat. Because I mean, you will see guys who seem to really be able to push food in the off season and they just don't gain that much fat. So with these guys, like, they're still eating the food and the energy is going somewhere. So are they just gaining at a greater rate because their P ratio is better, they're converting more of it to muscle, or is their metabolism just upregulating more in response, so they're basically burning hotter all the time?
Or is it like a glycogen utilization and retention issue, or refilling rather?
It's a combo of things. One of it that people don't never think of is imperfect absorption of calories. Like by the end of a prep, you absorb every calorie you eat. So like if you ingest 2,000 calories a day, we just assume that that's how many calories get into the bloodstream, but that's not always true. Like at the end of a prep, yeah, you're extracting every nutrient, but at the end of like when someone's really pounding food, like when they're doing 1,000 grams of carbs many days a week and eating 5,000 calories, there's just so much food. Not all of that is crossing the small intestine. Some of it is going all the way down to the large intestine and out into the toilet. And probably some of it all the time, even when you're in prep. But you just get way more efficient at extracting nutrients. It's almost like a survival mechanism. So that plays a role. There's the metabolic adaptation, which isn't huge, but it is there. You upgrade your thyroid production. You when you're hot, like in the off season, after a high day when you're running hot, you sweat all the time. So that's an upregulation of metabolism. Yeah, I know you guys were because now I understand with my wife. I sympathize with my wife more when I came back from Tampa, because that's what I used to have to do, have the house like as cold as it would go. Well, now I'm like a normal person. Yeah, and now I'm a normal person with a normal metabolism, so I get the temp can be 70 degrees, 72 degrees, and I'll tolerate it. Well, before it was over 65.
Right now.
56, actually.
I turned it up a bit.
So yeah, but now I know I feel bad because my wife complained for years, and I was like, "You're crazy! It's hot in here." When it was
the
like
absorption
62.
thing's funny. I remember this is probably like a year or two ago now, and Mike Israetel of Renaissance Periodization did a video kind of about this, and it was in response to some fad, because at that time there was some trend or fad going around in the weight loss industry talking about how like this or that supplement would help you like absorb your food better and improve nutrient absorption. I think if you think about it logically, you're like, hang on, isn't that the opposite of what we want? And he's like, guys, obese people are the fucking best at utilizing nutrients. They don't need better nutrient absorption.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's probably, that's the first thing, like what happens to someone with a malabsorption disorder. That's the first thing, that's one of the first indicators, is they're thin, rail thin. But you say that's funny. That's like the HCG diet. Have you seen those? The HCG diet? So you take HCG, and for 6 weeks you eat 500 calories a day. It just cracks me up. You're eating 500 calories a day. With or without the HCG, you're going to drop some weight. But it cracks me up because if you Google HCG, the first things that come up is HCG diet, and it's like, and you see all these people saying, "Oh, it worked amazing for me. I took my HCG. I ate 500 calories a day for 6 weeks."
I want to go leave.
The HCG didn't do it.
If any on those websites, be like, "Man, I don't know. I took HCG and all I got was pregnant."
Yeah. I'll be like, this HCG diet works so amazing. I didn't even take the HCG. I just ate 500 calories a day, and I lost weight.
I wanted to chat real quick about high days too, because